So, Jesse, with that, you know what's coming next. Are you ready for rapid fire?
We got a lot on the list today, so
We do.
let's get to it.
We added a big one
Oh,
this afternoon. A big one dropped
thanks,
across
Vince, for adding more
college.
work.
College football playoff executives voted unanimously today to change the seeding for the playoffs for the upcoming 2025 season. Teams are going to be seeded directly by the rankings 1 through 12, eliminating the concept that designated the top 4 seeds to the 4 highest ranked conference champions like last year. This also means that, unlike last year, Notre Dame would be eligible to get a bye. So again, straight 1 through 12, Notre Dame now eligible to have a first round playoff bye. Scale of 1 to 10, how much do you like it?
If I could give you 100, I would, but I will say 10 out of 10. And the reason why I'm so excited about this is, one, this was my biggest grievance with the playoff, last year with the 12-team format. I thought it was the silliest thing. And now you're actually ranking teams based off of pure merit and not just off of, winning potentially a conference championship. And, also I just feel like this, again, kind of kills the whole argument that a lot of people use of, well, Notre Dame's got to be in a conference if they're going to make it far into the playoff and have success in the playoff. It's like, well, last year they didn't, and they played a first-round game, and they went on to the national championship, And so now I just feel like it kills that conversation. And now Notre Dame, not only do they not have to play a conference championship, but they could also get a first-round bye. You know what I mean? So, think about that. A team, they could get 2 weeks off compared to a conference champ who would only get 1 week off because they'd have to play in the conference championship. And so not being in a conference and there being no reward for a conference championship is best case scenario for Notre Dame. So I have to be a 10 out of 10 in this.
Yeah. And I mean, the reason Notre Dame got left out of this initially was because of the fact, well, this was the concession. You're not in a conference. You don't have to play one of these conference championship games, even though no one's making any of these conferences play the conference championship games. They're doing it
money
to themselves. Yeah. For the money maker, for the money grab, for TV and selling tickets and everything else. So if you looked at last year, Arizona State, Boise State, Oregon, and Georgia got the byes last year. If you did it with the system that's going to be in place this year, Oregon and Georgia both still would have gotten byes, but Texas and Penn State would have gotten byes as well. So you'd be looking at 2 SEC, 2 Big Ten teams would have gotten the byes. Notre Dame would have been the 5 seed and would have hosted Clemson in the first round instead of Indiana, because Clemson was ranked 16th last year. But because they won the ACC championship, that would have moved them up to the number 12 seed because they won their conference. So, under this new format, if you win your conference championship, you still get an auto bid, but you're going to be ranked in a true seeding process. So I love it. This is 10 out of 10 for me. It's amazing that everyone looks at 1 year last year like Bernie. He says he hates it. I love the home game, builds momentum. And, Marcus Freeman was never going to say that playing a game in the first round was a disadvantage versus having the bye, and he wasn't ever going to say vice versa. But the honesty of the situation is, if you ask any coach, you don't have to go out there and risk anyone getting hurt. You have, you have to play one less game to get to the championship. I think they're going to take it 10 out of 10 times, don't you?
Oh, 100%. It's, we kind of had this conversation yesterday. This all assumes that Notre Dame lands in the top 4. If not, they'll still get that home playoff game.
You still have to be in the top 4.
Right. Exactly. And so that, which probably means if you're Notre Dame, you have to go undefeated. And so if you're not undefeated, you're probably not a top 4 and you get to host one of those games. So I would say more times than not, Notre Dame is going to be hosting a game than they are getting that first round bye. And so when they do get that first round bye, it'll just be nice because, like you said, every coach is going to take 2 weeks off. If they get that, it will. Again, Notre Dame is going to be the only team to potentially get 2 weeks off now with no conference championship and a potential first round bye. So you're always going to take the time off, especially at the end of the season. You're banged up. There's a lot going on.
I mean, like, look at the Jeremiah Love situation as an example. You've got a little bit longer to rest a guy like Jeremiah Love and anybody else who was banged up at the end of the season. Josh says, question is, could 3 weeks of rest be beneficial or hurtful? I mean, I think it all depends on how you use the time. Like how you go about preparing your team. There's obviously the
still
argument.
have physical practices even though
Right.
you're not playing another team.
Yeah, again, Bernie says all the bye teams lost. Well, could it be that maybe that's because Arizona State and Boise State had byes and they weren't one of the top 4 teams?
Right.
That's part of why
Let's
the bye teams all lost.
How this goes.
Could it also
year.
be that Notre Dame was better than Georgia? Georgia would have had a bye either way. Could it have been that Notre Dame was better than Georgia, and so Notre Dame won that game? I mean, again, you're using an extremely small sample size to generalize how you think all this is going to come out. And oh, by the way, this is only going to be for this year. There's a 12-team playoff this year. After this year, 2026 and beyond, it's going to expand. Whether it's 14 or 16, it's going to expand. So this is a 1-year deal that this is even going to be in place. Now, most likely, they'll go straight seeding, with whatever format they end up with, and they haven't decided, in terms of will teams get byes, how many teams will get byes, and all that kind of stuff. But did you watch the game, Bernie? He's saying, come on, the Irish had more talent than Georgia. I mean, they totally outplayed them. Georgia having a bye didn't lose them that game. Like, Notre Dame won that game because they beat Georgia at the line of scrimmage, and also a coach with much less experience outcoached a coach with 2 national championships.
Yep.
It wasn't because they got a bye. That wasn't why Georgia lost. We're going to have to agree to disagree if like otherwise, because it's just, there are plenty of, like, look at the NFL. The top seed always gets a bye. Now, does the top seed always get to the Super Bowl? No, but the top seed, unless you're the Dallas Cowboys, typically has a lot of success in the playoffs.
Very true.
All right, so let's shift gears a little bit. Notre Dame basketball great Pat Garrity was announced as Notre Dame's new men's and women's basketball general manager this week. Today, he was introduced at a press conference. Garrity's going to have 3 roles in his new position. He'll be the men's basketball sport administrator. He will also be the GM for both men's and women's basketball teams. So he was asked, how do you juggle all 3 of those things?
That's really good question, and I think the way this job is designed is maybe a little bit different than some schools have approached it. Some schools have approached is solely like a personnel is the heavy focus of the job. So I think obviously if I were to sequence it, getting up to speed on the sports admin side is the most important because that's a lot of the operational stuff of the men's program right away. But I think the dealing with specifically like the commercial aspect of the person on the personnel side, I think it's dealing with 2 teams is a lot, but I don't think it's anything too overwhelming where you're having the conversations with agents and parents and figuring out who's at risk of leaving and where you potentially need to shore up your roster, that kind of thing. So I think it's going to be a lot to learn. I think for me though, like really getting up to speed on the sports admin side at the first, and then we have 2 coaches right now who have been running their programs experience for a long time. So I don't think there's any real urgency right away to come in and change anything that they're doing.
All right. So there's Pat Garrity, the new men's and women's basketball GM. What do you think about all that, Jess, juggling 3 roles?
So I have an initial thought and I have a thought about the audio. Which one would you like first?
Give us a thought on the audio. Do the audio. Go ahead.
Okay. So the sport, I guess I'm a little bit confused by the vagueness around sports admin. Like what is there?
So this means he is the assistant athletic director.
Okay.
That is the administrator for men's basketball. So like Pete Bavacqua sits at the top of the athletic director chain, and then every sport has its own assistant/associate athletic director that is assigned to that team and handles, like all of the, sort of logistics and, like kind of like compliance and, all those different kind of issues for the sport.
Okay. So, I mean, that makes sense. A guy who hasn't been probably around college sports in a while,
Right.
it's a different world. So, that checks the list. Okay, sports admin. And then another thing he talked about was the commercial side of things. And so are we talking about like basically the selling of the product that is Notre Dame basketball?
That word kind of caught me as well, because like he was talking about it, I think in reference to NIL, because that's going to be one of the things in his role as the general manager. That's going to be one of his kind of chief duties is, and I think he kind of mentioned it in that specific cut where he'll be talking with the players, talking with the parents, talking with the agents as well. I don't think he necessarily went to the agents, but that will be part of it as well. Like working out the details of, because he has sat on the Notre Dame NIL board previously, so he's got experience with that, and so kind of working out NIL deals, whether it's for roster retention for players who are currently on the roster, or when you're talking to a potential transfer type player to get that, like that will be a big part of his role in this general manager role, big part of his duties.
Gotcha. And I think, the last part I think is the most significant part, basically the liaison between the university, the parents, and the agents. Like
Right.
that's his biggest job at the end of the day. And I think he hit it out of the park when he said, it's going to take that load off of Niele and Micah's shoulders. Like they might identify what players they want, but then it's on him to go out there and pursue and start the conversations between agents, players, all of that sort of thing. So that all makes sense. And I think that's the part he's got to be great at. And I think that's the part that he was ultimately, hired on to do is be a significant impact specifically on that relationship right there.
Yeah. And I mean, it seems like a lot when you're talking about doing all three. But at the same time, like when you look at, like, I think that Mike Martin, the football GM's duties are different in that part of his job, I think is sort of more identifying the actual talent. Whereas on the basketball side, it is more the coaches and their staff are still doing that when they're out going to the AAU tournaments and doing all those different things. But his part is more in the role of the traditional general manager, kind of like what you were talking about with being the liaison and being the one who's actually having those conversations about the money side and all that stuff. So you kind of take that away from the coach's plate, and there's not that, there's not nearly as much that's heaped on the coaches. Kind of speaking of which, I'll just kind of go to this right now because we got to talk with Niele Ivey and Micah Shrewsberry after the press conference as well. And Niele Ivey talked about the biggest benefit to her in having someone in this position, the general manager.
I mean, just allowing us to coach, allowing us to be out of those conversations, allowing us to do what we're brought here to do. That's a different part of coaching that no coaches have experience with, and it allows him to run those conversations, helps with agents and recruiting, and allows us again to be able to do what we do, which is to coach.
I mean, kind of feels a little bit underrated, doesn't it? Like just letting the coach actually be able to coach and not have to do all these things that have just come up within the last 3 years or so.
Yeah, and this kind of, the last question I told you, I kind of had like an initial thought about the whole thing, and this question actually leads better into it. Do you think that there's any, maybe what's the hard way to put this, animosity from Micah and Niele, just the seasons that they came off of? Micah's in year 2, probably not as ahead of schedule as they would have liked to be. It was a tough year, especially at the end. He had not his meltdown, but he had his rant towards the end of the season. And then we all know how everything ended on the women's side with Olivia and Niele. So it's just like, do you think that there's any sort of feelings where, it's like, hey, both
if
teams
I could just
struggled,
coach, yeah,
right?
If I could just coach, then I wouldn't have to deal with all this other stuff. Is that what you're saying?
the timing feels very nice considering everything that both of these programs just came off of this last season is, I guess, what I'm saying. And so when you hear Niele talk about it and say, it allows me to just coach. And she literally said it like almost 5 times, just coach. It really feels pointed that at the end of the season, Niele might have just simply said, I'm overwhelmed, with coaching, with recruiting, with dealing with parents, with dealing with money, with dealing with the portal, with all of it. And now, a month and a half later, you get someone who's coming in and really taking a lot of that weight off your shoulders so you can do what you're really good at. That's right. Identifying talent and coaching at the end of the day.
Yeah, identifying talent, coaching, but also maintaining the relationship with the player so you don't, because like that word that Garrity used, being that liaison, that's basically he's the buffer between the two. So Niele Ivey doesn't have to sit down, and I won't use names, but she doesn't have to sit down with player X and talk about, well, how much do you need in NIL?
And I bet that was probably a lot of the hard conversations at the end of the season was, Coach, we really love you and we trust you and you're great, but I can go get $1 million elsewhere.
Yeah.
And Niele's probably like, well, what do you want me to do? That's not really in my wheelhouse.
As a head basketball coach, you shouldn't have to be the one negotiating that kind of stuff. That's exactly right. And it feels like, based on everything that we heard from Garrity today and then talking with the two coaches afterwards, that's going to be just a huge part of it. And I've got another cut here from Garrity he was asked about essentially, like, when it comes to Notre Dame, both with roster retention, NIL, and the transfer portal, like transfer portal specifically, there are it's still a little bit more restrictive when it comes to Notre Dame, like in terms of who can get in, like who's a fit, all those different kind of things. And so he talked about that aspect of his job.
And I actually look at it as an advantage in a couple of ways. And so, number one, if you're going to a school as a young player that is doing business in the transfer portal and winning with seniors, like every year you're worried about someone coming in and taking my job. Like when you're a team and a program like we have here, the word is development. Like, we're bringing in freshmen, we're developing them physically on the floor into roles where they know that they can grow and excel. Like, and that doesn't mean that the portal isn't going to be a part of it, but I think as we've seen, it's going to be more limited than a lot of other places. So I actually look at it as an advantage, because when you're having a conversation with a young player and their family about your plan to develop them into the player and where you think they can get, like, they can pretty much take that to the bank if they come in and put the work in to get there.
All right, Jesse, very attentive with your ear. Anything stand out to you there that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think the development word is the big one. And if you're, Notre Dame and you're trying to sell someone on the program, it's just kind of like what we talked about with Marcus Freeman a lot of the time. It's you sell them on everything else outside of the money. You sell them on Notre Dame, the education, and then most importantly, the development. I mean, when you look at Notre Dame men's basketball, harder of a sell. But when you look at Notre Dame women's basketball, look at the track record of WNBA players that come from Notre Dame. And you talk about development of, okay, you stay here, you take a quote unquote pay cut, but look at the long-term success or the long-term kind of benefits that come out of the whole Notre Dame experience. And so I like hearing that from him. And that's ultimately, what it's going to take is players who are committed to the development, not just the early upfront cash, but the development, because I think that's also what's going to make you work harder at the end of the day. And I think that's something that a lot of people haven't really talked about with the whole NIL thing is these kids are just getting money and then just, what incentive is there to work hard after that, right? Like, you get money and it's like, all right, well, if it doesn't work, at least I got money, but it used to be like, you don't have anything besides that opportunity to go pro. And so that's what you kind of have to identify if you're Notre Dame, is players who aren't necessarily just in it for the next bag of cash that are here to truly develop and become a, NBA, WNBA player.
But to his point as well, Notre Dame is not, they're not going to live on one and done type guys. You might get, one of those guys every few years to come in if you're fortunate enough. And Micah Shrewsberry, because we're, one and done, we're still talking on the men's side, if he's capable of recruiting those guys, and he's got, some big recruits coming in this summer who'll be a part of next year's team. But you still have to be able to develop. As he said, it's still a developmental program. Like, look at Jaron Grant and Pat Connaughton as examples. Like, those guys obviously stayed at Notre Dame for multiple years, helped Notre Dame have a lot of success, a couple of Elite Eights while they were here, but they were also on the developmental track. Just like Pat Garrity, when he came out of high school in the 90s and ultimately ended up having a nice NBA career. It was still about a developmental path. And again, like, having someone in his position, I think is huge to just, take all this other stuff that's just come up in the last few years off these coaches' plate. So speaking of the NBA, final thought on this. Garrity played in the NBA. He was the Detroit Pistons assistant general manager for a few years. And Micah Shrewsberry talked about that, how that NBA experience can be helpful now here at Notre Dame.
Yeah, I think you take different parts from the NBA side and how does it kind of fit into what we do here. And like we talked about with the roster construction, with the salary cap, with all those things, you're trying to build your program in the best way possible. So I think all of our expertise is good, but ours was on the coaching side. His was on the front office side. So now being able to combine those two things, I think will be great for all of us.
And it just feels to me like college sports is mirroring the pro model more and more. How important do you think having that pro background is in this position?
So first of all, I don't know why, but every time I listen to Micah Shrewsberry, I never think that is Micah Shrewsberry. His voice just does not match up. But anyways, I think it's a huge deal because, in terms of having true raw experience at the highest level is more relevant and important than even doing this at the college level because they're the pros. And so I think naturally they're going to do things better. And you could say, okay, well, like, look at the Detroit Pistons success and all that stuff. They just kind of got good here in the last couple of years, but it's still the ability to be around it, to absorb it, and good or bad, you're still picking up things that you would or wouldn't do. And now you can translate that into college.
Right. And there's still the business side of it, which it really feels like this position is really going to, have a lot of a focus on that business side of it that you pick up in the NBA, because like they don't have salary caps right now in college, but the revenue sharing is supposed to be coming, and like all this different stuff is supposed to be coming. So, like, again, when you're talking about putting your roster together and you've got all these different players and agents and families with their hands out, like, you have to be able to put all that together and figure out how the pieces fit, not just now, but in the future as well. And that's what that's what you have at the pro level. Like, he's already, as an assistant general manager, dealt with a lot of that stuff. And obviously scouting and all that, stuff comes into it as well. And, it really feels like a good fit, because something else that they talked about, both the coaches and I think Pete Bavacqua, is the ability, to be able to show to the players that you're recruiting, like some of the great players you've had in the past. And Pat Garrity is one of those players. And, Troy Murphy, who came along, right after that. I think, they overlap by a little bit, but like those kind of players, Connaughton, Grant, all those different guys. And obviously the women's side, already has, like they bring their players back fairly regularly, but, they talked about having a guy like Garrity who can keep some of those past players involved and and helping to impact, what they're doing with the program right now. I think that's all going to be pretty important for Notre Dame, pretty big for Notre Dame to have someone in that position.
About to lose my mind in this house.
Did you feed him? Did you feed him before you started?
Mr. Home Improvement guy is back right now banging on the house.
Ah, gotcha. Fill in the blank. Notre Dame great Jerome Bettis is going into the Cotton Bowl Hall of Fame on Friday. When you think of Bettis, the first thing you think of is blank.
The first thing I think of is his nickname, the Bus, and obviously a guy who, in my opinion, he kind of changed what you thought of a running back. You think of quick, dynamic, flashy guys. Jerome Bettis was a very physical, run over you type running back, right? And so that's the first thing that I think of when I think of Jerome Bettis is just how physically imposing he was, and it's like, it's kind of like, like the white man can't jump. It's kind of like, the big man could be the running back. Basically, he proved that a big man, and he's not, big as by comparison, but like you just didn't see someone like him play running back, and I think he kind of it redefined the position a little bit.
It's kind of crazy when you think about his career, because the first thing I think of is the Sugar Bowl against Florida, Steve Spurrier's Florida Gators. This was well before you were born. This was like the 91 season, the 92
This is why it's
Sugar
tough,
Bowl.
because I didn't get to actually see him play.
See, I was thinking you did. I was thinking that you got to see at least some of him when he was still, kind of like toward the tail end of his career with the Pittsburgh Steelers. You don't remember any? You're still too young to remember that?
I just don't remember much of it.
Okay. Because that's what I like. The first thing that comes to mind to me is just those big gashing runs that he had against Florida in that Sugar Bowl when Notre Dame was an underdog and Lou Holtz was talking about, what was it, Cheerios or Notre Dame, which one belonged in the bowl and all that kind of stuff. And Jerome Bettis was just the poster child for running over the Gators that day. They wore the white jerseys with the green numbers. And, like it was just the Jerome Bettis show against Florida as Notre Dame rolling over. So that's the first thing that I think of. It's hard for me to think of him in a Pittsburgh Steelers uniform because of the, the history, like my tortured youthful history with the Pittsburgh Steelers in a couple of Super Bowls. Sly Fox says Penn State Snow Bowl, another good one. Reggie Brooks with a big touchdown in that game as well. Washington Commanders Foundation Chairman Marjorie Harris said this week, the Commanders are America's team when talking with the media. Meanwhile, after NFL owners voted to keep the tush push, the Eagles posted a game photo of them playing against the Green Bay Packers with a caption that said, push on social media. Which is the bigger shot fired?
So I have to go with the Eagles and their push on post with the Packers in the background. The Commanders thing is whatever. Everyone nowadays just takes their claim of this is America's team and we're America's team and yada yada yada. So that's
not even the Beltway's team. Come on, give me a break.
Yeah, you had one good year, and all of a sudden you're America's team because you had a good year. You made it to the playoffs. You won a playoff game. Whatever. I think that the other one is more of a shot fired because I believe for 2 years in a row now, the Eagles have eliminated the Packers from the playoff, and the Packers were the biggest crybabies about this tush push rule. And
they're the ones who proposed the change. That's right.
I don't know if you saw this, but the final vote was 22-10, and that was the final score of the Eagles and the Packers when they played in the playoffs.
Ooh, no, I didn't realize that.
And so I just think it just all lines up to be, it's just the Packers are crying and they didn't get their way, and I don't mind the Eagles just basically saying, hey, you tried, but it failed. So I don't know. I don't think you could go wrong with either, but I enjoyed the Eagles' pettiness because the Packers are only crying about it because they can't beat them in the playoffs.
That's what it comes down to, and it's definitely it's the bigger shot to me is the Eagles pushing on right back at the Packers. The Packers are being soft babies. Lincoln Riley might as well be coaching them right now. Like the whole, everyone wants to be America's team, and everyone wants to throw it out there like they're America's team. And I get it. Like there's like a lot of people who hate the Cowboys and they're tired of the Cowboys being referred to as America's team. But look at the ratings every year. And that's why they're America's team, because they still have more interest than anybody else. Even when they're bad, there's still more interest than anybody else. That's why they're America's team. And, like who just said it? Craig, does anybody even like the Commanders? Like, no. No. By the way, I saw something yesterday. I sent you the tweet. I don't know if you actually watched it. The Commanders actually, remember in the playoffs when they played against the Eagles and they kept jumping off sides at the goal line and there was all that stuff going on? Mm-hmm. Well, the Commanders may have figured out a way to actually stop the tush push, and that is you have your defensive end come off the end unblocked, and you don't actually go for the ball carrier. You actually try to take to the ground.
Oh, the push man
behind him. Like you tackle, you get guys to come off the edge, and you try to get the push man in the backfield before they can get a really good push, because that's how this thing is so successful. It's not the initial surge, it's the push in the backfield after it looks like the play is stopped, and it keeps going. So we'll see if someone tries to replicate that and is able to actually slow it down this year. Won't be the Packers, though.
If you ask everyone, it's just because Jalen Hurts can squat 600 pounds.
Yes, of course. Fill in the blank. Tyrese Haliburton, during Reggie Miller's choke gesture after his last second shot, sent the Pacers and Knicks to overtime in Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals, was blank.
Absolutely fitting. There was no better and Reggie Miller was on the call of all things. I don't know. I want to share my screen real quick on this photo.
Okay.
Of Reggie Miller last night. I'm not sure.
I think I saw. I've probably seen this because is it the one where they're pointing at each other? There it is.
That right there is when you've done it. It's like the Spider-Man meme where they're pointing at each other. Like, it was just, you couldn't have asked for a more electric fitting moment where Reggie Miller's there, you're down 11 with like 50 seconds left, and you somehow come back and win that game. It was just, there was nothing else that could have been done or said in the moment that would have been better. Like, that was the best way to end that game. And what Haliburton has been doing late in these games to the Cavs, what he did in the first round to Giannis and the Bucks, he's just been on a tear. And so he had every right. Reggie Miller was on the call, and it was just the perfect moment, in my opinion.
Big hat tip. I mean, huge hat tip. Craig said, what a shot. I mean, that thing clanked off the back iron, shot how many feet up in the air, and then comes down. It was nuts that it even went, and then it looks like it's a 3, and it turns out his toes on the line, so it was a 2, and they go to overtime instead. Before last night, teams had gone 0 and 1,414 in games when trailing by 9+ points in the last minute of regulation or overtime. The Pacers are down by 14 with less than 3 minutes to go last night. They were down by 9 in the last minute and somehow managed to win. It was just, it was insane. So very, very fitting, pretty cool tribute with Reggie sitting right there that Haliburton did that.
I stopped watching in the fourth quarter. I had to go back and watch the rest of the game this morning because
I will not deny that I fell asleep last night.
I had to go back and watch all of the fourth quarter and overtime this morning. I got done working out early this morning. I was like, oh, you know what? I got a little bit of time here. And so I pulled up the highlights and I watched it on YouTube. But I mean, what really this game, like, yes, Haliburton did his thing and got the final shot, but this has to be known as the Aaron Nesmith game. The amount of threes that he just kept.
He's the one who actually did the Reggie Miller impersonation. Yeah. It's just that Haliburton got the, like the highlight shot of the night. But it was Nesmith that was actually, because it was Reggie who was cranking in all those shots in the original choke game. Yeah, you're right.
It's just really funny though, because like say what you want about the NBA. I just thought that these first couple of games have been tremendous. And if you can truly watch these games and say that the NBA is so much worse than what it was X amount of years ago, I just have a hard time believing it because there's just so many more skilled players in the league this day, in my opinion. Everyone can make a freaking shot, and it just last night they were just burying shot after shot.
And people call the Knicks the Villanova Knicks because of the three guys who played for Villanova, obviously. But when you watch their style of game, one, I've told you I love watching Jalen Brunson play. One because of his style, and it's just it's kind of fun seeing really the smallest guy on the court who at times doesn't even look like he should be out there, just carving up these big guys left and right. But the way, he drives and kicks and they move the ball and they share the ball, it's not like a lot of other NBA teams that you see. And then when you look at the Pacers style of play, that pace, man, they just keep running.
They run
and run.
And
it's just, again, it's so different. Are you pulling for either one of these teams after the Pacers
Knicks
knocked your pseudo Cavs out of the playoffs?
I'm actually a very low-key Knicks fan, and I'm a low-key Knicks fan because of you, actually. I'm a huge fan of Brunson. I thought he should have been on the Olympic team last year, to be honest with you. But yeah, I'm a low-key Knicks fan. I have a question to ask you. Have you ever seen – is his name Rick Carlisle? Have you ever seen the Pacers coach happy when he's on the court?
No.
He always has this –
I know.
No matter what, the entire game, there is no fluctuating, just the whole time.
I think Haliburton was on McAfee last week, and he was talking about how his job is to try to make Rick Carlisle laugh once a game, just to try to keep him a little bit loose. He tries.
That makes sense.
That's right. One last question for you on somewhat the same subject. Fill in the blank. It's blank that with the Knicks, Pacers, T-Wolves, and Thunder all in the NBA's conference finals, it means the NBA is going to have a 7th champion in as many years when the winner is ultimately crowned. It'll be the first time that has ever happened in NBA history.
It's fishy. And the reason why it's fishy, and I'm gonna have fun with this, so just get on board. But there's conspiracies going around right now. I don't know if you heard about Shaq this week talking about, when he got drafted, they approached him and he said that Howard Stern said, "Would you rather be cold? Or would you rather be warm?" And Shaq said warm, and look where he ended up, the Orlando, right? And so, and now here we go. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna play into it. And then there's the, Cooper Flag this year. How did the freaking Mavs end up with Cooper Flag after just trading away a generational Luka Doncic, right? So all these things. And then now we're talking about how, the NBA for their ratings, they want different MVPs because we haven't had back-to-back MVPs in a long time. And now we don't have back-to-back champions. So you're trying to get new MVPs. You're trying to get new championships. I think it's great. I don't think the game is rigged. I
don't think the NBA is chomping at the bit for the possibility of an Indiana Pacers Oklahoma City Thunder finals. You talk about
right.
You talk about dust in your ratings, man. I think it's a league that is I realize the NBA and conspiracy theories go hand in hand.
Right.
But at the same time, it really kind of feels like they have figured out, I'm drawing a blank on what I was going to say, actually. Parity. They figured out parity, basically. But when you've got that many, because look at the West. The Golden State Warriors were just running the West, it seemed like forever. And now all of a sudden you've got all these great teams coming out of the West and different teams representing the West in any given year. You had a freaking Phoenix Milwaukee NBA finals just a few years ago.
Last year you had Boston and freaking the Timberwolves, right? So it's I know Boston's a more household name, but the Timberwolves, and now they're again in the Final Four. I think the NBA has, like you said, find a good way of there's really no dynasties in the sport anymore. Yeah. And It's really a year by year kind of basis. And it's crazy because I think that's why there's so much fluctuation in the coaching carousel as well. You got guys who win world championships and then like a year or two later, they're getting kicked out the door. Like I just don't think that you would see that in really any other sport.
Yeah. So Tommy missed part of the question, apparently. Because of the fact that the Knicks, Pacers, T-Wolves, and Thunder are all in the conference finals this year, it means that the NBA will have a 7th champion in 7 seasons when this season is over, because none of those have
None
won.
of these 4 teams have won a championship in a long time.
Right. So you're guaranteed to have a 7th champion in 7 seasons. And like you look at the other, like the other leagues, and it doesn't happen very often. What are you laughing at?
The NBA lottery is obviously rigged. They don't even hide it. I just wanted to get the people going. I knew I would light that fire, baby.
I do find it curious that they don't even bother to roll out like the ping pong balls anymore and do the lottery with everybody watching. Like they just announce what happened in the lottery. Do you remember? It wasn't that long ago, was it? Do you remember when they used to do like the like the ping pong balls and stuff?
I think it makes it seem more legit. I think it gets you away from that conspiracy talk.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right, well, that's going to do it for tonight. Appreciate you being here. And
Tommy figured it out. We can all go home now.
Yep, that's right. A lot of good stuff in the We In, We Out tonight. Hit the like button before you leave. DK says the NHL lottery is rigged. So apparently every lottery is rigged. So the NFL should just go to a lottery so everyone can use
I'm definitely in on the NHL lottery being rigged, because 2 years ago there was it was the Columbus Blue Jackets and basically the Chicago, and the Blue Jackets had a way better chance of getting the number 1 overall pick, and the Chicago hasn't been good in a while, and then all of a sudden they just get revitalized by this number 1 pick. So I'm in on that, and I can share that I actually know a little bit of NHL knowledge.
There you go. More than me. All right. Hit the like button before you go, and we will talk to you tomorrow on IB Nation Sports Talk.